Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, a lot of people speculate whether or not God exists or not. I'll tell you one thing that I can guarantee does not exist. Financial regulators. Stacy.
Right. I mean, it's beginning to look a lot like 2008 to us. We were around and reporting back then on the beginning of the global financial crisis, which we believe is still kind of ongoing. But at that time, of course, it was in around the same time of the year, March of 2008, where Bear Stearns had two hedge funds that collapsed and set in motion what would later, a few months later, 6 months later, become the global financial crisis when Lehman Brothers also collapsed. You're starting to see that again. The debt crisis has risen again, you might say. Bill Wang of Archegos, his fund collapsed in a spectacular fashion with a massive margin call, up to about $30 billion margin call he received. And it looks like he's really impacted. Not only did CBS, Viacom CBS fall by 27% as all his shares had to be sold off by the counterparty banks, but the banks themselves, like Credit Suisse, have been hit. Credit Suisse warns in pre-market statement of a highly significant hit to its first quarter results after it began exiting positions with a large U.S. hedge fund that defaulted on margin calls last week.
So do we play this as a tragedy or a comedy? You know, that's always the question. If I go tragic, that would be one way to go down the tragedy path, or I could go down the comedy path. Either one, or there's tragicomedy. There's a big mix of both. If I go down the tragedy path, things could get woolly.
So the first time was tragedy. We covered that in 2008. This time is comedy because it's the second time. So if it happens again in the same exact way, the same exact manner, that happens over and over. The first time our financial system almost collapsed was back in the 90s with long-term capital management. Remember them? That's when the Fed intervened to rescue one single hedge fund. Here we have the same sort of situation. And again, just like 2008, again, remember I said that the financial crisis has risen again, and that is it went through Europe. Because what happened was huge amount of leverage using something called contracts for difference, which are illegal in the US, but are allowed in Europe. So nevertheless, it impacted US markets hugely. Here are the complex bets at the heart of the unprecedented Archegos-linked $30 billion margin call. Losses that triggered the liquidation of positions approaching $30 billion in value bring to light complicated financial instruments used by European investors that effectively are banned in the United States, but still have spillover effects domestically. So-called contracts for differences were at the heart of some of the massive wrong-way bets made by Bill Wang's Archegos Capital Management. Max, you know, because you used to be an options trader, so CFDs are the kind of derivative instrument that allow traders to place a directional bet on the price of a security without actually buying or selling the underlying instrument. It works much like a futures contract, say an index. The buyer and the seller agree on the price of a transaction sometime in the future at the end date or earlier. If they decide to unwind the position beforehand, only the difference between the actual and the agreed price will be settled. If the price went up, the seller pays the buyer the difference and vice versa. So you're able to do this with putting down very, 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 very little on the actual bet.
There is structurally no difference between a contract for difference play and a roulette wheel. Okay, there's structurally absolutely no difference. When they say directional bet, okay, it's either red or black. And that's part of a roulette wheel. Then you could leverage it almost with an infinite leverage because remember, money is free because you've got 0% interest rates if you're an insider. And so that would be a number on the roulette wheel, like number 27. And so you're making hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in the bet. They spin the wheel. And here's the great thing. If it doesn't come up the color that you want it to come out, or it doesn't come up the number that you didn't want it to come up, you get to go to the cashier and they pay you not only how much you lost back in cash, but they give you 10 times more. Mm-hmm. And they say, you got to go back to the roulette wheel and try it again because you are systemically important to the global economy. Without recidivist banking terrorists like you over at Credit Suisse and all these other banks, then how will we out in the Hamptons be able to buy this yacht next month? That's systemically important. How would we be able to justify these 0% interest rates that by definition, by provable cause and effect, A plus B equals C, when I make that face, it usually gets nasty, right? So I don't know whether to go, it's tragic or it's comic. David, I was just looking at some clips of that movie Margin Call, and it's a Hollywood movie based on this exact event having been played out now several times. It's become pantomime. It's such a trope now that every 10 years they go through the machinations of this global financial crisis brought on by regulators, brought on by rogue traders that hit a fat finger trade and accidentally triggered a multi-$100 billion margin call. Then send in the devil, the villain with a twisty mustache. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll print $15 trillion. And then some mop-haired, short-haired, white-haired witch like Janet Yellen's trotted out in front of Congress and we had to print. Then Jay Powell appears with his top hat. Hello, I'm Jay Powell. I'm from the 20th century, and I'm here to tell you that this is absolutely normal. It goes on like that again and again and again and again.
Well, let me intervene, Max, because I do believe that it is continuing as a comedy. This time around, it is comedy. It is hilarious. And the reason why it's so much more hilarious this time, the first time was tragedy back in 2008 and 2009. And the reason was because Bitcoin had not yet spread mass around the world. There was no safe haven for ordinary investors, ordinary people to save themselves from this financial system, which was corrupt. This time around, it's comedy. We could laugh, saying to them, have fun staying poor because we have Bitcoin. And millions of people around the world now have Bitcoin. And, while these people play their crazy games and the central bank will bail these people out, sovereign nations will bail these people out. Back in 2008 and 2009, Credit Suisse got injections from, I think it was the Qatari sovereign wealth fund and the government. So they'll have to be bailed out. Some suckers, taxpayers, inflation, everybody will pay for these suckers in the fiat world. But this time around, we have Bitcoin. And I want to say, like the CFD situation, the MarketWatch article interviews a former SEC regulator, Amy Lynch, who says about them that they are extremely risky, is how she characterized CFDs. It's kind of like being able to go into a naked position, she said, referring to naked bets where investors use derivatives to gain exposure to an investment without owning the underlying asset. So the markets are naked. They've been exposed as having no clothes, essentially.
Right, yeah, former regulator. No active regulator.
No active regulator will say that openly. They won't warn you about this, especially at that sort of level where it's like a major bank like Credit Suisse. They're allowed to get away with these things and they just get to say, oops, sorry, our bad. We'll save everything. We'll print more money and it all goes away. But this time I'm saying it's comedy, Max. I am laughing. I'm laughing hard inside. I might not be laughing right now and you can't see it, but I am laughing so hard inside that I could just watch these people like a car crash. Like, it's just like, okay, this is like a clown car crash, right? It's just like cars filled with clowns, overfilled with clowns crashing into each other in that fiat banking system, which is so corrupt now.
All right. It's funny. It's also funny when people suggest that Bitcoin's going to be regulated. And you hear that from academics and talking heads on TV all the time, like, we're going to regulate Bitcoin, as if they regulate any market right now, that they're not just basically, it's pay to play in the regulation field, right? You pay for the laws, you pay for the rules. And, we've got over $1 trillion now to pay any regulator we need. It's not going to be regulated. There's no regulation going on now.
Well, there is, and that is, these are legal in Europe. These CFDs are legal in Europe. These people can engage in this. It's illegal in America, but the bankers in America want these illegal things to be illegal, to continue legally in Europe, so that they could destabilize the system anytime they want. Because every time you see it over and over and over, look at the wealth and income gap across America. It goes up every single time there's a crisis. So it's in their benefit to There's no.
We've been saying for many years
Yeah.
that America outsources its financial illegality to Europe, particularly the city of London, where they
Yeah.
have things like infinite rehypothecation.
Yeah.
And that loophole hasn't been closed for
No.
the very reason that it needs to remain open to allow for these fraudulent activities.
Again, so you have the system that has recovered and recovered. And remember on the front page of all the U.S. mainstream newspapers and magazines, they were like, Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon are heroes and they save the system and they're gods. And Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke save the system. So we'll see what actually saving the system has meant. And it's part of that CFDs. It's part of the explosion in leverage that has happened. That we know for a fact the actual economy, manufacturing, wealth creation has not increased at all since 2000, right? So what is this all based on? And if you're going to have these hedge funds like Archegos collapse and possibly take down the system, like how fast will it all spiral, right? Because that guy's leverage, of course, collapsed him. He doesn't have to pay any of it. His company doesn't. He'll still be a billionaire. It'll be all these banks, which will eat the cost, but the banks then give it the cost to the regulators, the central bank, the taxpayers, and all that stuff. So in the United States, February FINRA margin debt up $15.1 billion month on month to $813.7 billion, a new record. It's up 69.8% from last March's low. The S&P 500 is up 81% during that period. All good, except it is easy to forget during good times that margin debt cuts both ways. We are witnessing live the dreaded side of margin calls. The collapse of Archegos triggered turmoil on the U.S. markets as the likes of Viacom, which is in many pension funds across America, collapsed by 27% as those trades unwound.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's tough at this juncture to understand if this is supposed to be, or we're supposed to be sad or laughing. You don't really know. It's a psychodrama. Right, a psychodrama it's weirdly funny, but also weirdly tragic at the same time. The people in charge have given an unlimited credit line to the most psychotic, recidivist kleptocrats human history's ever known, and they're just standing back to see what happens. And predictably, they're destroying the global economy and driving Bitcoin to $500,000 a coin. It's
basically this time around the 2021 financial crisis, and it'll go through 2022, 23. It's the Monty Python version of the 2008 crisis. And because we're all going to be laughing, and it's going to seem as ridiculous as and amusing as any Monty Python sketch.
I can hardly wait for the next huge hedge fund to blow up and for Bitcoin to go up to $250,000. Stay tuned for more after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with Lawrence Lepard, independent investor and prolific Twitter man. Lawrence, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Max. Thanks for having me on the show.
We've been talking about portfolios and how to position. And you got two major themes. One is that you don't have any more bond vigilantes giving any kind of true price discovery to the bond market. You don't have any gold vigilantes giving any true price discovery to the gold market. You have a lot of money printing. And Bitcoin, of course, is reflecting that money printing. But how do you position your portfolio? What's the mix?
That's a great question, Max. My fund has traditionally been a gold fund, and that's the world I came from. And Bitcoin was only invented in 2008, and I got involved in 2013. My personal weighting has grown over time, and the fund's weighting has grown over time. I think it really depends on everybody's individual risk profile and preferences. As I say, gold is analog hard money. It's a bearer security. You can take it with you. You can hide it. You can lose it in a boat accident. It's not necessarily taxable. And, it's got 5,000 years of history, and everybody knows it's money. Bitcoin obviously is a superior, many ways superior alternative to gold in terms of transferability, storage costs, et cetera. But it's emerging. And Of course, as a result of its emerging, that's also why it's had such fantastic price performance. It's just crushed gold in terms of price performance. I think there's a role for both in everybody's portfolio. And actually, it's kind of interesting. You could almost kind of look at it as the old, bond stocks model, where gold is maybe your bond. It's, if you look at historically since 2000, it's gone up about 10 or 11% a year, which compared to today's bond yields is pretty darn good. Gone up as measured in fiat. In reality, it's stayed the same. Fiat's gone down. And then Bitcoin is your growth stock, right? Which is grabbing share from gold, but as with many growth stocks, it has a lot of volatility. And so I think people need to figure out what their risk profile looks like. I've often said the only wrong allocation to Bitcoin is zero. Obviously single-digit percentages aren't going to make much of an impact, but I certainly understand why people don't want to be 100%. I know I wouldn't want to be 100%. I mean, again, Bitcoin can win in the long run, but let's say we have this run up and, the government says to themselves, hey, we got a lot of citizens getting filthy rich off the notion that the currency is failing and we don't want the currency to fail. We're going to just float the idea of a 90% tax on Bitcoin profits. Just float it, not even get it through, just float it. Think of the impact on the Bitcoin price. It might not be good, right? And so, because of that outside risk, I don't want to be 100% Bitcoin. I want to have diversity between the two assets.
In 2021 is the 50th anniversary of Richard Nixon taking the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. Looking back now, Lawrence, what do you think have been the positive and negative consequences of this decision, which is meant at the time to be temporary? How it plays out domestically, internationally. You're a big gold man. You know this whole story very well. What do you think?
I think it was obviously a horrible decision. I think it was tragic. I mean, if you look at the wealth inequality, the wars that it's funded, it was partly done as a result of the Vietnam War. And I think it's just tragic, the implications for society. I mean, that, and then you take the admitting China in the WTO, hollowing out the manufacturing base of the Midwest and creating a lot of deaths of despair, as they call them, people who, do drugs or drink themselves to death or commit suicide. I mean, to me, so many of the ills that we face in our society are a function of not having sound money. And, not having sound money, I believe it's an ethical issue. And there are others who agree with me that, the whole notion that some people can benefit from the Cantillon effect and that it steals from the average human being who's just trying to live their life, work, and save money. This is as you said, it's a tax. It's a tax that nobody voted for, and it's been horrible for the country. And, it's coming, in my opinion, it's coming to its end point now. It took an awful long time, but, we're getting there. And, I hope and pray that the end point will come sooner rather than later, because none of our lives are infinite, and that we'll return to a sound money standard. Because I think the bright part of this entire story is that on the other side of returning to sound money, I think society is going to look a whole lot better than it does right now. As you pointed out, Washington is corrupt, but you take away their ability to print money and control the printing press, and Washington's going to disappear. We don't need them. And that's going to become pretty obvious, I think, on the other side of this sound money revolution.
Right. You mentioned the deaths of despair. Last year, 70,000 opiate-related deaths in America, and those were entirely by design. So we had more deaths than we suffered in the Vietnam War. And, meanwhile, the U.S. is dictating to foreign countries a certain agenda about bringing democracy and freedom to those countries under some kind of Washington consensus or U.S. foreign policy. But if the U.S. foreign policy were to be applied to America itself, wouldn't it make sense for America to bomb itself?
Yeah, it really would, Max. I mean, it's, we've been, look, I love America and I love the ideals America was founded. I love the founding documents, but we've strayed a long ways away from what was written in those documents. I mean, Constitution has gold and silver as the only acceptable forms of money. What happened there, right? And, the Vietnam War, millions of people killed for, a domino theory. I mean, it's tragic, some of the things this country has done. And it's a long list, and which is not to say that there aren't many great people and great benefits to this country. But, honestly, some of the people that rule and that lead the military-industrial complex, I wouldn't want them spending time with my kids. It's not a nice group of folks.
Now, over the past few years, America has seen a drop in life expectancy. It's an extraordinary outside of wartime. And can you relate it directly to the consequences of U.S. dollar's global settlement layer? You kind of alluded to this earlier, that maybe once the U.S. dollar loses preeminence, the quality of life in America actually would go up. The need to have a trade deficit to maintain that status, for example, to keep the dollar, U.S. dollar reserve. Wouldn't it be better if the U.S. got out of the global hegemony game with the U.S. dollar, maybe, Lawrence?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that the world will look a lot better when, the monetary playing field is flat. We have a neutral reserve currency. We're not exporting our jobs overseas. Things are priced correctly all the way around. Farmers actually can make a decent living because they provide the one thing we all need. I mean, it's the distortion in the price structure of every good and service in this world created by, the U.S. monetary policy and the U.S. military industrial hegemony is gross and has hurt, and it's hurt and killed many, many, many people, in my opinion. It's just an opinion. I could be wrong, but based on studying history, it's what I've concluded. And so, that's why, as I've always said, if I'm successful in my investments here, I mean, I view my remaining life's work is to try and restore sound money to the world, because I think it's my hashtag on Twitter is, fix the money, fix the world. And I really believe that. I think it's the fundamental underpinning of a lot of the problems that our society faces. Most people don't see it, and it's unfortunate.
Now, in the last episode, we discussed inflation and how it, of course, is tax. It's taxation by a different name. The other tax we have to talk about is actual taxation. So Biden plans massive tax increases. How's that going to play out?
Well, he sure does. And, and some people say, well, that's why gold's going down and the government's going to get its act together. But you go look at the plan, and it's about a $3 billion increase over 10 years. So it's $3 trillion over 10 years. So $300 billion a year. Now, we're running deficits that were last year 3.1, the year before that 1. This year's, I got to believe, 4, maybe 5. Do you really think that a $300 million or billion dollar tax increase is going to start to close the government funding gap? No, it's just not. Now, it might slow down the economy, and obviously, it'll be satisfying to some progressives because they'll say, well, the rich are paying it, and perhaps some of them will. But, it's to me, it's all just noise. It doesn't really impact. If you look at the numbers, it's just not meaningful. Biden, I couldn't believe it. The ink wasn't even dry on the March stimulus package, and he came out and said, well, we might need one in April. I mean, this just it's never going to end. And so, and the reason it can't end is because you can't, taper a Ponzi scheme. You have to keep increasing the amount of money shoved into the system, or the system collapses. I mean, that's what all of us in the sound money community see and understand. And it's why we placed our bets the way we placed them, because it's inevitable. Now, the timing is different. The timing I could have wrong. I mean, obviously, gold's in a correction now. It's no fun. But, I've been doing this since 2008. I can wait. And I get anyone in this area can wait.
Sure. I see your assistant just walked in and took a...
Yeah, you see my dog? Yeah.
What's the dog's name?
This one is the girl. Rosie, come say hello. Yeah. Yeah, no, she probably wants to go out. I probably got to go open the door and let her out.
Yeah, Rosie, I understand, is into Bitcoin. And so you and Rosie aren't talking right now.
That's right. Yeah, no. Hey, Max, there's no bigger Bitcoin fan than me. I love it. I bought my first 2 at 300, but I just haven't given up on gold. And I would just suggest to all the young people that are 100% Bitcoin, to just keep in mind, the volatility argument I made earlier. That's all.
No, I get it. It would be more convincing if when you said that, you weren't on the verge of tears. But anyway, let me move on.
No doubt.
Property prices are up over 10% this year. Wages are up 14%. Thanks to government transfers, and used car prices are up over 15%. Right? Yeah. So you're saying that all those price signals that are real aren't helping gold, but the Ponzi mentality and the superstitions out there that somehow the Biden administration is going to fix the economy is dropping the price of gold. I know what kind of drugs America's on, but Obviously, it's not gonna go for long, is it? This delusion.
I don't think so. I really don't. I don't see how, and I think we're very, very close to the end of this drawdown in gold. I mean, I look at all the sentiment indicators, which are very good at predicting cycles, and they're just throwing it out right now. And by the way, they're being helped. They're being helped by the banks. They're being helped by the BIS. They're probably being helped by the Fed desk in New York. Et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they need to take the eyes off of gold, and they've done it. They've done it very well. I mean, they're trying to take the eyes off Bitcoin too. You saw Lagarde say something negative about it. Then you saw Yellen say something negative about it. And then they went and they leaned on India and said, and got them to ban it. So India's our lapdog. We try out policies on them, and they just banned Bitcoin, and they can't kill Bitcoin. They just can't.
Okay, we got to go. Lawrence, thanks so much for being on Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me on, Max. It's always fun.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Lawrence Lepard. Until next time, bye, y'all.